a nílò láti ka àwọn ìwé wa nítorí pé a nílò láti mọ̀, like really mọ̀ àwọn history wa àti gbogbo tí a rò pé nípa the world, really.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the final installment of my episode and conversation with Augusta Irele. So on part one, we talked about her life growing up in different parts of the US up to her Ph.D. The second part, we focused on literature in Africa and specifically her work on the diaspora and a couple of authors she's following, her process of reading a book and writing her dissertation. So I encourage you to look at it if you want to learn and understand more what it means to be a PhD in literature and actually have to write a dissertation specifically about Africa. On part number two, we're going to focus on our dear, cherished and loved motherland, Africa. And I'd like to kick the conversation asking Augusta, what does it mean for you to be African?
Oh, big question. What does it mean for me to be African?
Big question.
For me, it's exciting. I talk about being African all the time because I think it puts me into a particular history and kind of cultural orientation. I also think of Africans as, and this might be a very awful thing to say, but as inherently oriented towards the communal, right? So I think for me, when I talk to other Africans or like meet other Africans, I assume, and this again might be just the wrong assumption, but that they also value things like family and community, right? And really connecting on those levels because historically we've always just organized ourselves in those ways, right? With like the intergenerational families and all that stuff. It also means that for me, it's like good food, good music, good clothing, and those are like superficial things, but I love them and I have always since I was a kid. And it's fun. I always get so excited meeting other Africans. It feels like this like secret code, right? That you kind of like unlock when you meet someone who like has the key to that code. And only when you have the key. So even people like, sometimes I'm like, are you? Because I am. Are you? And it's like, but it's so much fun when you can discover that someone else is also, and you can talk about what that means in your life and the nuances of like where you're specifically from. So it's fun. I love being African.
Nice. Have you had the chance to travel in different countries? I know you mentioned your first time going back to Nigeria, but have you had a chance to travel in other countries so far?
So for me, it's Nigeria and Ghana are the two places that I have been and spent time. Nigeria, I try to go back every 2 or 3 years. Although now, I don't know, my mom just sent me a video about increased banditry. So I'm not really sure I'm going to be going back for the next year. People are getting kidnapped. But I really love Ghana. So I think that the next trip will be Ghana in the next year. We were just in Nigeria in November.
I'm not going to ask you who has the best jollof rice between...
It's not a question.
It's not a question.
Competition.
I like it.
Although I will say that's the name of the Wi-Fi network in my house. My fiance is from Ghana, and so we named our Wi-Fi network Jollof Wars.
Nice. What would you say is one very fond memory that you have from those recent trips? It might be actually, maybe even switch the question. What's your very first memory when I think you were 11 years old, when you set foot in
Yeah, I think about that trip a lot. It's really, I loved it. So we spent some time, we went, because anybody whose parents are academics know that the only vacations you really take are like when there's a conference. So we went to Ghana because my dad had a conference in Accra. He just decided to turn it into a family trip, which is fine. We also did that to Lawrence, Kansas. So, we have dynamic. But so after the conference had wrapped, we hired a driver to just kind of drive us up to different parts on the coast. Mm-hmm. And so we went to Cape Coast, went to the castles. But I remember when we stayed in Cape Coast, we rented basically like we had a house basically to ourselves. And that was my first time being near the ocean. And we were able to ride horses. We still have these pictures. ride horses on the beach next to the ocean. It was just so beautiful, like just so profoundly beautiful. You know, I was a child, so I don't know if I like felt it. You know, I say now that like this was proof that God exists, right? But I'm 30. Like when I was 8, I'm not really sure that was what I was thinking. But I think whenever I do think back to that moment, I just feel the serenity. I feel serenity. I feel peace. Like it was such a great trip. And I always tell people who, you know, they're inevitably when you tell someone you're African, they're always like, I want to go. I want to see the continent. And I always tell them start with Ghana. Because I actually think Ghanaians are the nicest Africans. Also, I think that Ghana and Senegal have both developed tourism industry, you know, and so they actually care about the experiences that people have when they come. Don't start with Nigeria. Nigerians don't care about you. And I say that as one.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I would, you know, as a Cameroonian, I like to remind the world, that's the pride Cameroon in me, that Cameroon nickname is Africa in miniature. Why? Because every type of vegetation or climate or type of soil or whatever you find in Africa, and that is true, like really, you can find in Cameroon in different places.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, for tourism, I would definitely say, I don't know if I'd say start with Cameroon, but I would say make sure you hit Cameroon.
It's on your list, yeah.
I agree with you.
That more well-traveled on the continent, to be honest. You know, part of it obviously is like, as one of 5 children, like it was just hard when you can't, it would cost us $10,000 every time to gather all of us and move, you know, into travel. And so growing up, like it wasn't a reality. And so now as an adult, I'm trying to kind of tackle that. But, you know, now I'm a grad student again, so I'm going to have to wait a little bit before I can do my grand tour of the continent.
But it's coming. You know it's coming.
It's coming. Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's just a matter of time. That's an interesting segue to, I want to briefly mention, we talked about the literature in part number 2. So I want to talk about literature in Africa. I think it's a fact worldwide that people are reading less and less. And that's because of the proliferation of different other ways to consume media. Right? I'm thinking about I'm going to name them because at this point it's not advertisement anymore. So Netflix, Amazon Prime, Spotify for music, podcast, audiobooks. So as a Ph.D. in literature and as a bookworm, as you say yourself,
yes,
how do you feel about that? Have you adapted yourself to those new type of media? Have you switched to audiobooks? Does that worry you? Are you like, how do you feel about that?
Do you know actually what's interesting about audiobooks? I read, this is about the US, but I read that actually audiobook sales are going down. Like people are still buying physical books. And I think last year, 2018 was the first year in a long time that physical book sales had gone up in a long time. I personally cannot do audiobooks. Reading for me, it's like a really physical, I have to touch the book. Even the ebooks, like sometimes I feel like my recall later is diminished when I read an ebook versus like when I read an actual, like when I read it and interact with it physically. And I definitely haven't gotten into the audiobooks, although I'm very much into podcasts. And I think maybe it's just the bite size. For me to sit down and commit to just sitting and listening to something is hard. And I wouldn't be able to fully grasp what's happening in the book because I'd be doing other things. I like to, you know, listen to podcasts while I'm like getting dressed and taking a shower and all that stuff. And so I don't know that I would have the same experience with audiobooks. What I do actually like about them though is that they have the potential to make literature more accessible. And I love that. So when I'm teaching, if an audiobook feels more appropriate and more comfortable for my students, I'm totally fine with that being the medium that they use to engage with the text. And actually, there's a certain way, I actually think Chimamanda Adichie reads her own audiobook. Nice. And so there's a certain way that you're engaging with the text at a different dynamic that maybe the author intends for you to engage with it better, right? Via an audiobook. And maybe I'm just closing myself off to that experience. But I think it's cool. It's exciting. And you can like carry around books on your phone and like listen to them. I think all of that is really awesome. And I think in the case of the continent in particular, actually that might be the way to increase engagement with literature because everyone now you kind of need a phone, and folks have 2 different SIM cards, right? And so you're accessible in that way, in a way that, like, when there's no light, you can't go to the bookstore because there's no light, right? And they might not have a gen, or the petrol is out, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So if there's if there is a way, and I'll say this, I will say that I'm not plugged into the audiobook scene on the continent, so I don't know, right, what the conversations are around audiobooks, and if there are conversations about audiobooks. I just truly, it's not an area that I know much about. Mm-hmm. But I think it could be an exciting tool for helping people think about literature. What I'm actually more interested in, though, is the exposure and the reach of the people who are writing now. I think encouraging creative production is one of the things that I would identify as a top priority. Mm-hmm. I think we, especially coming from these, like, colonial, formulaic educational systems, the freedom to be creative is something that is really a luxury, and that I wish was a luxury that we afforded more, especially young people, because I think that it's really important to think about how you could be living life differently. And on the continent, I mean, literature is such a social justice political tool, right? Like, it's not just there's just the history of African literary production is political. It's always been political, right? Especially in these European languages. And so there's so much at stake in being creative. And I think that we have to continue to encourage creativity in young folks, because it's a practice of imagining life differently, and it's a practice of representing yourself in a particular way. And both of those things are super important as we think about how Africans are continuing to need to be engaged on a global scale with all these other cultures.
Yeah, that's super interesting. There's 3 points that I want to mention based on what you said. The first one about audiobooks and the feeling that you have to recall a bit less than when you read a book. There's actually been studies about it, and it's true. And one of the experiments is, the whole reasoning behind the experiment is, when you read a book, or you have a physical book in front of you, you're actually physically turning pages. Mm-hmm. While the other study, the other group in the study where they had a Kindle, the problem is that with a Kindle, because you're always one tap away from your emails, or switching books quickly, or just starting browsing, your attention immediately is less on the book and more on the physical device and what you can do more about it. So that's one thing. The second thing about audiobook, I would say, I've read and I've listened to Trevor Noah's Born the Crime. Mm-hmm. And I agree that me, because I like the Daily Show a lot, and I'm getting used to his voice, but definitely via the audiobook, I felt like I was connecting more to what he was saying. Again, just because I knew his voice already. And the third part that you mentioned is around specifically Africa and a way to encourage. I want to bring back a topic that we introduced, I think, in the second part, the fact that our way of expression in languages is different, right? What you can say in Swahili, for instance, might be different than how you do it in English. And to that, I would add the fact that traditionally, the way we transmit knowledge in Africa in general has mostly been vocal, right? We're not
oral, Mm-hmm.
So, in that sense, though, and again, looking at you with all of the studies you've done, what do you think would be lost with that media? So, let's say if I encourage my grandmother to tell me her story via an audiobook compared to just sitting down and writing, do you think there's going to be eventually something lost in the process? Because I see a lot of good and bad, right? I see the rawness of it, where you just don't edit and just completely let the flow out, with some good and bad. But yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Do you know what excites me? I'm going to answer this a little bit with a I don't know how directly I'll answer the question. What I will say is, what excites me about this technological moment that we're in is that those two things are not mutually exclusive, right? So you can write aspects of her story, maybe put them on the internet, right? Alongside video of her telling the story. especially in particularly animated parts. And so you can hear this, the sound and see her actually performing, because there is a performative aspect of storytelling, right? Especially in African traditions, and especially in kind of royal courts and stuff where folks were, the griots, it's a performance, right? Mm-hmm. I think that there are things to be said for the affordances of particular media, right? So literature, when it's written, can be transported and communicated, especially if it's written in a European language, can be transported and communicated widely and institutionalized in a way. It gives it a particular purchase when it's like published in a book, right, by a publishing house. But now we have these audiobooks where like we can experience when Trevor Noah talks about his childhood or his experience growing up, or when your grandmother talks about like a particular story from her childhood, we can also hear the dynamic when we're listening to them tell those stories, which adds to the experience. And I think it's valuable and should be a point of analysis. So one, I think we should all be doing that. We should all be recording our elders anyway. It's an opportunity. My dad passed away 2 years ago at 81. And it's something that it's like my one big kind of life regret. I have a few videos and like recordings of him, but I wish I had, and I was supposed to. He passed away 2 weeks before I was supposed to start recording him for his like memoirs. And I wish that that's something that we all just did. And now we can do it so easily with all of our technology, just recording our elders telling their stories. Because there was more of a social practice around that before colonialism. And even if we remained on the continent, those would be things that would just be happening naturally that are not happening anymore because of kind of all of the different systems and structures that we have to interact with now. And that's a positive way of going back to what they call the primitive, right? But going back to what we would be doing before, right? We would sit around the fireplace and listen to grandma tell a story.
Exactly.
Right? And all the cousins would be around, and her kids would have listened to this story 17 times already in that day, maybe, but it's still part of the ritual. And I think we need to bring that back. I think that's part of the communalism that I think is really important and really central to being African, that I think we need to reinstate.
I'm 600% behind that. And I think it's solving so many problems at a time, right? It solved the problem of our languages. I'm banking on the fact that AI will get so good that it would not just be limited, as I think it is today, to translate Portuguese, Spanish, all of those Roman language in a couple, but go all the way to someone speaking Swahili fluently and you have a live translation in English. Yeah. It solved the problem around our culture. So, there's so many things from my tribe, Bamileke Cameroon, that I don't know about, that I know my parents know, my grandparents know. The clothing we wear when there's a death, there's specific ceremonies that are happening that I think with time people are forgetting, and then people change slightly, and then 2 generations from now, people will forget that. That solved that problem. And finally, recently, I interviewed a friend of mine, Ramel, and he told me about something they do in Mexico. I don't know if it's in the whole country, but they have some sort of museum in their home about people who passed away. And it can be like a bunch of pictures or video. They keep talking about it. They have recordings of it. And it's a way to keep the person alive. Because the thought process is, as long as we can see her or hear her through those videos and audio, she's still with us, right? So I think that's an amazing way, again, through technology. Again, I'm a geek, so obviously I'm going to applaud every effort on that end. A quick question for you, Augusta, that came to mind. So one way we talked about to consume media nowadays is the Netflix, the Amazon Prime, so a lot of video content, talk about audiobooks, you talk about podcasts. And depending on where you see it, you can look at it positively or negatively, or depending on the day or the season or whatever. Social media as well, right? Facebook, Twitter. So I've had that crazy idea that might remain crazy. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. But when I look at the youth in Cameroon specifically, spending their lives on Instagram and Twitter, is there a way from a literature point of view to dissect a book or a dissertation, an essay, an idea into very small, easily digestible bits? Because audiobooks for the diffusion, I think in the US we're used to a podcast. In Africa, based on the latest data, assuming that we trust them. It's not there yet.
Yeah.
Spotify is not all over Africa, so
Yeah.
it's better than before, but it remains difficult to consume audiobooks and video because the broadband, you have the 4G connection. While I feel like something like a tweet or a picture is easily so. What are your thoughts on that into distributing literature content via those media?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think just because of maybe it's because social media, maybe this is just human evolution. Our attention spans are so short these days that we actually do have to think about how to make these things bite-sized and digestible, especially for young people, because they have all of these other things, and because of the kind of cultural predominance of the U.S. around the world, they're constantly going to want to consume something that is engaging with the U.S. or coming from the U.S. We're competing with America, right, for like the attention of young people on the continent right now, and it's crazy, but it's true. But like I have, all of my young cousins in Nigeria sometimes will tell me news about something that's going on here before I hear about it, right? Like they're so plugged into what's going on here. We have to make it appealing in that way, and we have to make it digestible so that it's equally enticing, but doesn't distract them too much from America, which is the real concern, which is, what it is. So I think it's a great idea, and I think you're in the tech world, so that's for you to start out. Me with my actual physical paper books here, I'm not at that level of sophistication yet to start out how to get there.
From a creative content though, right? Because you're writing, you're actually creating content, right? How would you address that? Because I'm pretty sure, as you've told us in part 2, the way the process around writing will be tremendously different from your process if you know that you have to break it down bit by bit, right? You need to make sure that each bit is digestible, self-contained. So that's going to be insane, just switching from that media to the other.
Yeah, approaches. I think you have to outline it and really kind of plan it out and design it. And I think the thing that would be really important is the visual, like the graphic aspect of it. So what is it that we're highlighting? Is it a symbol? Is it a question, right? And then how do we introduce, and this is all like the marketing and the graphic design that would make it appealing. So then the approach would be, I'd have to plan it out. I'd have to actually literally day by day plan it out to see how does it all fit together like a puzzle piece to create this larger picture at the end that we can zoom out and actually see, right? Like it's not just bite-sized for the sake of being bite-sized, but it's bite-sized to build towards consuming the whole thing, So it'd have to be really like in those micro elements. Yeah. It's an interesting challenge. It's a good idea.
Yeah, there'll need to be some type of feed where you can, if you decide to sit down and read the whole feed, it will be the exact same knowledge than reading the whole book.
Right, exactly.
When you look at music, for instance, right, there are a lot of instruments that we used to in different countries in Africa that you only see right now in museums because those instruments became obsolete or they evolved a certain way and now they just belong in the museum and that's the only way you see them. Are you ever afraid that at some level in the future, with tech disrupting basically everything right now, that we end up at a point where books will be in museums because we'll be consuming media or knowledge from a complete different way? Does that ever cross your mind or do you ever think about it?
It doesn't until you brought it up just now. But you know what? It's fine, because when you think about kind of the evolution, like of how we consume these things, right? First, it was what are those? The wax block. What are they called? Palimpsest, right? And then we got into thinking of Western, the history of this is in Europe, but there are things. I think we've lost some things on the continent very quickly because it was deliberate, right? So some of these like skills, music, language, some of these sources of knowledge that did not gel with or that threatened European standards or European ways of doing it were deliberately trained away from us, right? Or trained out of us, yes. But I also think that humans in general, like in our very nature, are constantly seeking to improve or tinker, right? And so if eventually some new technology comes around that works better than the physical book. And if the book ends up in a museum, then that's just what, then the book was supposed to be in a museum, and it's a piece of, at least it's being preserved. So people knew that books existed at some point, right? Like cassette tapes now, right? Like when we were growing up. I don't think that means that people won't be reading or telling stories. I think it'll just have transitioned to a different medium, and the books as they exist now would have become obsolete, which is fine as long as we're still telling stories and reading, and taking in other people's stories.
Definitely, it's fine. I'm just surprised because I think you had that attachment to the physicality of the book.
I do. Yeah, I will be 90 years old still reading books. Yeah. Everybody else can do whatever they want with their chips implanted into their brains, but I'm going to still be carrying around my little paper book over here. Whatever you want to do, that's your business.
Yeah, and it's so crazy because again, it's just something that crossed my mind. I don't know why I took a musical instrument as an example. I can just talk about journals, right? Like the New York Times or everything. It used to be that big piece of paper that you were. I remember just growing up, my dad had those big. It was an adventure, like reading and just flipping those big pages. And nowadays, it's all about either through your smartphone or your computer.
Yes. But only 5 articles a month, unless you pay for it. New York Times.
Okay, Augusta, one questions that I have for you, looking at what you do, what is one problem or struggle that we have right now in Africa that you would like to solve or be part of the solution?
I'd like to solve or be part of the solution. I actually think it is this creativity. There's a problem that I would identify, but I don't want to be part of the solution. I don't want to be involved in it at all, which is the problem of these like mega churches. But I do think the creativity piece is something like that I would be very interested in being part of those conversations and really fostering kind of the act of storytelling as a fundamental social practice. I think it is, and I think it's human nature. Uh-huh. And I think we're being trained away from it and led away from it. And I think we need to return to storytelling, and especially in spaces as vulnerable to external intervention as we have. Like we have so many of these kinds of spaces on the continent. Mm-hmm. We really need to protect the act of defining ourselves. And we do that through storytelling. And we do that through fostering creativity and reimagining. And imagining, right, representing our realities and then reimagining what those could look like. Depending on the genre, like it could even be science fiction. I think those are all very important. I shouldn't say even. Science fiction is important as well. Nobody should come for me. But I think, I think that's a project. I've thought about this of like founding like a writing workshop or something, or, a foundation on the continent that really emphasizes that piece. So I think it's sad when you watch people so keen to represent other cultures. And this is what Chimamanda did in her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. This is what she's talking about, where she was growing up writing stories about snow and she didn't know what snow was, in Enugu. So that's what I would love to be. I would love to be part of that kind of an initiative, like bring creativity back.
What can I like to ask after that to kind of challenge ourselves to think in the present? And I know you already have your Ph.D., so it's not adding one more item into the list of many actions and projects that you're already doing. But if you have to start tackling that problem today, how would you transform those thoughts and ideas into actionable items?
That's a great question. I think it would have to be an NGO route, and I think like going with particular schools and maybe thinking through creativity curriculum, right, that people can implement in schools. And it would be, I'm really adamant that those of us who are outside of the continent, we don't know more or better for the continent than people who are there. Mm-hmm. And so the approach would have to be really careful to elevate voices of people who are engaged already in some of these national curricula and are engaged already in the education scene. Mm-hmm. Because just by dint of having gone to school here doesn't make me better equipped to solve this problem. Uh-huh. And the fact that I'm even identifying it as a problem is from an external perspective, right? Like some people on the ground might not think it is. And so, Yeah, I would do it. I would approach it as an NGO and working at the school, primary school level, to think about how to infuse kind of creativity into curriculum.
I see. It's an interesting route. I would say that it probably even need to go at the home level, right? Because I don't know about Nigeria, but I remember in Cameroon, if I was ever growing up telling my mom or my dad that I want to, I'm thinking about it because there was a study recently that said, look at kids, I think below 15 in China and in the US, and they asked them what they want to be. And in China, most kids wanted to be astronauts, and in the US, most kids wanted to be YouTubers.
Oh my God.
Which for me was mind blowing. And in Africa, in that context, I mean, back then YouTube wasn't there, but today I see kids in Yaoundé telling their dad they want to be a YouTuber. It's okay, are you kidding me? Like that's not a real thing, right? So even beyond the school, I feel like even at home and culturally somehow we need to change mindset and say, hey, if someone grew up wanting to be a writer, that's it's not as stable as again, we know the type of job that we consider as stable in Africa, but yeah, the switch will need to happen at the school level and even society in general.
I think that's true. I think writers used to hold a privileged position, like right in society, writers and academics, and I think it's diminished greatly, and we need to get that back. I also think that there are some very prominent writers who abuse that visibility, right, and continue to make the writer kind of a problematic figure, and especially those who spend more of their time outside the continent than they do in, right, but who position themselves as spokespeople. So, yeah, I mean, it's a big task, to turn around kind of a whole cultural perception of what it is that we do. In a move where people really are trying to study computer science because that's what gets you a job in America, it's
sure.
It would be a big task, yeah.
It will be. We almost toward the end. One quick question on that: have you thought about eventually talking about your own creative process? I'm asking that because I found that lately, just asking different people, when we used to do something or when a lot of people around us are doing the same thing, we kind of take for granted the fact that either it's easy or it's not that difficult, or you can easily find it online if you Google it nowadays. Like if you want to do a podcast, just Google how to do a podcast and you'll find out information, right? But I do believe that in your own way, the way you approach African literature and your dissertation, there's something specific that will make your work different, right? Not just the content, but just the approach, the roadmap, the routines that you have. So have you considered that to be part of teaching the existing or next generation how to be more creative?
I think that's a good idea. I think the thing that's interesting about the way that those creative writing is set up as a completely different field from literary criticism, right? So I'm trained as a literary critic, not as a creative writer. And we often don't think about them as intersecting. Yeah, it's a whole different, like the classes would be different, right? How I would approach teaching people how to write creatively. So that's I started teaching a class on Monday for people, so that's helpful because then I can infuse that into my actual practice, practically next week. But I think it is important, and I think this is what makes what makes it hard, what has made it hard for me, to be quite frank, about writing this dissertation, is that I have never identified as a writer. I've always identified as a bookworm and a reader, and I know how to analyze, but the actual creative part of it has been a struggle and is very difficult for me right now because I think of them as distinct processes and as distinct skill set that require kind of different approaches. So I'm real good. And this is what I do when I procrastinate: is I sit and I read more, right? Because I'm like, reading more is always, I'm gathering information as research, right? Instead of just really developing my craft as a writer.
Makes sense. Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Augusta. I think we can close this third part with a quick firing round. So quick question, quick answer. At the moment, who is your favorite or let's say the African author you're the most obsessed with?
Dina Mengestu.
Okay. Which book are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading a book called Foreign Gods Inc. by Oke Ndibe.
What is it about?
It's about a man who goes back to his home village to capture the city's deity to sell it to a gallery, a very bougie gallery in New York City.
Fancy. Okay. Mm-hmm. Best country you've been so far?
In the world?
Yes.
Get me in trouble, but I'm going to say Ghana.
Yeah. Okay. Next country you'd like to visit?
Angola.
Why?
I've just always been fascinated with the Portuguese-speaking world, and Angola in particular. I'm also trying to honeymoon in Mauritius. I'm obsessed with Mauritius. But I don't think that's going to be next, because the wedding isn't until next year. So.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. Favorite African singer?
Ever?
Yeah.
Sade.
Okay, I don't know. From where?
She's half Nigerian. Sade Adu. Actually, her dad went to school with my father. They were classmates.
Okay, I'll check her out. And for the end, I know you speak a couple of words in Yoruba. So I would like for you, anything you want to say, it can take 30 seconds, it can take 15 minutes, just...
30 seconds is even long.
Go for it.
What I would say is, anilo lati ka àwọn ìwé wa, nítorí pé anilo lati mọ̀, really mọ̀ àwọn history wa àti gbogbo tí a rò pé nípa the world, really, colonialism and everything. So anilo lati ka gbogbo àwọn ìwé tí a ń kọ now. It's bad, but that's what I've got. We got to read all of our books.
That's more than enough. Thank you very much, Augusta, for taking the time today. Thank you to our listeners for sticking with us all to those 3 parts. I hope you liked what you've learned from Augusta, her whole life, the recommendations about the book, her writing process, and just her vision about Africa. I hope that you learned from that. As always, feel free to subscribe if you want to hear more, or share with a friend, family, colleague, or anyone just curious to learn more about Africans and what we do best. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you soon.